Please welcome San Francisco Bay Area architect Richard Gage, AIA, member of the American Institute of Architects, and founder and former CEO of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. He now leads the charge for a new World Trade Center investigation, along with his courageous wife, Gail, at richardgage911.org. Please welcome to the show.
Thank you, Shane. Awesome to be here with you.
Absolute pleasure to finally get you on. We had a little bit of bouncing around behind the scenes, but everything kind of happens as it's intended to happen. And one of the things we're going to be diving into today, of course, is something that for at least my generation was one of the main things that really woke a lot of people up. Millennials, Gen Z or Gen X. It seems like this was one of those really big main events that really started to make people aware of the fact that the government may potentially be lying to you. There's a lot more to the story. So I think this is one of the first opportunities I've had on the show to really have somebody with your expertise really be able to come on and cover it as a whole. So I'm really excited to get into some of your research and some of your work that you've been doing.
Thank you. I'm excited to share it with you and your audience here.
So before we get into the presentation, of course, because there will be a video component to this, because that's very important when you're looking at this type of stuff. For anybody that may not be familiar with what exactly got you into researching this, why don't you give them a little bit of a background on what exactly sparked your interest into doing this research?
I was minding my own business, driving home, back to the office, actually, from a construction observation meeting in Lafayette, California, where we had a high school we're working on, and I'm hearing this interview by Bonnie Faulkner of Guns and Butter program on KPFA in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I heard David Ray Griffin being interviewed, and I'd never heard any alternative theory. This is 2006. March 29th, I believe. And he's talking about the Twin Towers and the explosive evidence that had just come out from an essay written by Professor Graham McQueen, who found at the time 118 first responders who were witnesses of explosions many of them before the tower came down. So here I'm listening to this, and he's talking about molten metal dripping off the beams that were also flying so far out of the towers. He's talking about a third tower that came down, building 7. I didn't know a third tower came down. I'd never heard such a thing. I'm an architect. I would have heard if a third tower came down on 9/11. And most people don't even know. Most architects and engineers know nothing about World Trade Center Building 7. So I was just shocked. I had to go listen to him that night, and I did the next night. And he was at the Grand Lake Theater in Oakland, California, and man, there were 600 people packed into that. I couldn't even get in, and I had to watch on the live stream, which I figured out how to do. And man, all that evidence, I said that either this guy is just pulling the biggest scam on people, or our government and media did, which is, of course, what I found out over the next figured out as I did deeper research over the next few weeks. So I took this information to the architecture firm that I worked for at the time in Walnut Creek, and they thought I was nuts. Many of them talking about this stuff, but after I learned how to do PowerPoint, and I gave them a presentation, bought them pizza, so they came in and ate, and they got their fill, because in 45 minutes, I asked for a show of hands at the end. How many people think we have a controlled demolition here and need a new 9/11 investigation? All the hands went up. Oh my God, you're right. These are controlled demolitions. So I was on my way. That was my first 14 architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. Now we have 3,600 demanding a new investigation.
Say, what not a better group of people demanding an explanation on this one? Because, I mean, even coming from the outside, not looking at it from an architect's perspective, some of the weirdness that ended up happening, especially with the mainstream media, was they were reporting on some of the explosions explosions. I think they said explosions in a couple of reports on accident, and they actually reported on one of the buildings falling before it actually fell, I believe, on British television. So it was already the story was falling apart at the seams right as it was starting, and it just took a matter of people really putting that magnifying glass on it to really start seeing all of these details and actually putting it together that there's clearly a giant cover up here.
Yeah, there really is, and I was ashamed to be a part of it. I didn't even recognize that those towers were blowing up, not collapsing, as I watched that morning, and over the next several years, I just didn't get it until I heard this gentleman who's now passed away, David Ray Griffin, but his work lives on through us and a million in the 9/11 Truth Movement.
So for anybody that may have heard about this whole, I don't even want to call it necessarily a conspiracy theory because there's just way too much stuff involved with it. But I know it's one of those things that a lot of people really sit on the fence about, as far as some people believe it, some people just don't at all. What would be some of the first steps, do you think, to start convincing somebody if they possibly just didn't necessarily believe in the 9/11 towers coming down from controlled demolition?
Well, I would start by watching this podcast, which is, we're going to get into all the evidence, and indeed, it's in an hour. We're going to cover not all of it, but a third of it. We can highlight it here. I have a 4 or 5 hour presentation I give on this subject, and there's more on the website, richardgage911.org.
And I'll make sure I include that link down in the show description so everybody can find it quick and easy, and of course be able to continue on checking out this research. But I'd like to kind of start getting into the presentation too, to be able to start kind of showing people a visual with some of this stuff, because everybody kind of hears this stuff floating around, but it's hard to fully understand the concept unless you really start seeing it. Because especially one of the main things that I think has always stuck out was everybody's always heard, the steel beams melting. It's going to take something a lot harder or a lot hotter than jet fuel to be able to melt these steel beams. Yeah. And, everybody sees the pictures on the internet, but there's so much compiling information now that they just try to throw as much as they can into the narrative now. So, getting into kind of like a visual representation of some of these theories that people have heard, but maybe not actually took a full consideration of them because they didn't have anything to actually see as far as this goes.
Yeah. Yeah, right on. Well, it takes a lot of courage to look at this, because even a seventh grader can understand with an open mind, can understand the evidence that we're going to be showing today. This, you don't have to be an architect or engineer, but it takes courage. If you want to start those slides, let me know when they're going, and then. But the implications of this evidence are deep and vast and psychologically disturbing, because all of a sudden the world is not such a safe place. I don't see the slides, Shayn. Are you showing them?
I think you should have the option to screen share, right?
I'm screen sharing. Am I not? Oh.
Yeah, the screen share is not popping up currently.
Oh, we didn't reset it. That's what happened. Let's fix that real quick. Okay, and there. Sorry about that. So yeah, I'm daring everybody to know the facts, and that's what we're going to talk about today is facts. 95% are facts, and we'll do a little speculation if called upon. We can always try to keep you clear on what's speculation and what's facts. What's not speculation is that a third tower did come down. I'm one of 90,000 members of the American Institute of Architects. We didn't get one bulletin on this, the third worst structural failure in modern history. And we didn't know about it. we go all around the country to conferences. People don't know about it. Well, this is that building on the left there, Building 7, part of the World Trade Center complex, actually. Half the height of the Twin Towers.
Mm-hmm.
At the time they were built, they were the tallest buildings in the world, dwarfing everything in New York, including Building 7. But this building would be the tallest building in most of our states. It wasn't hit by a plane, and yet it went down also. And we'll talk about that. And here it is standing just fine after the Twin Towers came down. It did receive a little bit of damage. We will talk about that. NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And they did a study on this building, and they said that that damage was not a significant factor in this building's collapse. Well, let's look at that collapse. Here we have Building 7. You'll see in the upper left, the east penthouse coming down now in an isolated event, six seconds before this overall global collapse happens, straight down, uniformly, symmetrically, suddenly, into its own footprint. And we'll break that down. But let's look and see what Shyam Sundar of NIST, the project director, says about this building's collapse.
What we found was that uncontrolled building fires caused an extraordinary event. The collapse of World Trade Center 7 was primarily due to fire.
Primarily due to fires. Okay, well, this is an important step because, as you'll see, we've never lost a steel frame fire-protected structure due to fires. But let's look at those fires. These are the worst fires that we have any evidence of. And they are few, and they are small, and they are scattered, as you see, throughout the building. And that's pretty important because their theory of their initiation of collapse by NIST requires that those fires are burning on the floor that they are claiming that the initiation of collapse happened on. But let's look at those fires. So we have in their simulation an exaggeration, a gross exaggeration, a fraudulent visualization of the fires in this building. They say at 4 p.m., but they imply that these are going on all the way through the collapse, which was at 5:20. So for an hour and a half, they're saying these fires are burning in this area, causing these long span beams to thermally expand, causing this girder to be pushed off of its seat on this column 79. Well, none of that can happen for a whole variety of reasons, which we dissect in our longer presentations. But just notice that the photographs reveal that those fires are already burnt out on floor 12, and they have moved all the way over to the west, and they'll be burnt out very soon after this. And this is at 3:50 p.m. So more than an hour before this building collapsed, those fires are gone from this floor. So they could not have been causing the thermal expansion that we are told happened on these long span beams. So what really brought this building down? Was it fires? Well, fire has never brought down a steel frame fire protected structure ever. They don't collapse. That's because steel is fire protected. And it's also because the steel is so dense, it distributes, it conducts the heat throughout the beam and the building that it is being affected. So not before 9/11 have we lost a steel frame skyscraper, nor after. And we've had a dozen much hotter, larger, and longer lasting fires in these buildings, as you can see. So what can bring down these structures? Well, controlled demolition is an option. Does it look anything like Building 7 on the right? These known controlled demolitions on the left. Is there any similarity? Is there enough similarity to warrant an investigation into the possible use of explosives? Especially since fire, the official cause of this building's collapse, has never in history brought down a steel frame, fire protected structure ever. So we're going to take a look through the 10 key characteristic features of controlled demolition and some uncharacteristic features as well, beginning with feature number 1. Is there a sudden onset of destruction? Well, let's listen to Dan Rather as he narrates his view of this building's collapse that evening.
What you're seeing are high shots. Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself. Describe that. Now we go to videotape the collapse of this building.
It's amazing.
Amazing, incredible, pick your word. For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
Oh, what was that, Dan? Deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down? Well, here he is using his intuition, his common sense of all things, to try to figure this out. Unfortunately, he didn't say that ever again on mainstream television. In fact, we've never seen this building collapse on any of those platforms except for twice. And so we have a huge problem trying to get information here. It's been swept under the rug. Let's look at feature number 2. Is there a straight down symmetrical collapse? Well, from West Street, we can see, yeah, it's pretty straight down and pretty symmetrical. How do you do that, Shayn? You have to take out all the core columns, followed within a fraction of a second of each other, followed about a second later by the perimeter columns, and repeat that on several floors, if not all of them, at least 8 of them. I'll tell you why in a moment. Can these fires take out those columns with that level of precision? We don't think so. If you don't have the precision, you get all kinds of problems in controlled demolitions like this, which is a real problem. Or this, it stops. Somebody has to go back into that building and set those charges that didn't go off. That's right. So that's a problem. And
this was one of the things I was going to point out, was even from an outside perspective of not an architect. I mean, you can clearly see that this was an intentional destruction of this building, because otherwise, I mean, just what you're showing exactly, like if this was knocked down in any natural way, I guess you could say, then it would have done more damage to any of the buildings surrounding it. And from at least the looks of the pictures, this thing had some buildings extremely close to it. So it's absolutely shocking that there wasn't any giant structural damage to any of the buildings around it, unless, like you were saying, it is an intentional demolition.
Right. And they're blaming fires. Well, if fire, which is in the northeast corner in the lower left predominantly, and on the north side, if fires were the problem, the building would have tipped over. We would expect that. Even if those fires were hot enough to expand these steel beams, which are fireproof, so they couldn't have expanded them, and they couldn't have pushed this girder off of its seat on this column, because it would have had to push it all 12 inches off. This is the beam seat. It's 12 inches long. It would have had to push that girder all the way off. Why? Because the edge of the flange is protected with, and the web of this girder is protected with these steel stiffeners that you see are installed right on the edge here. So NIST says they weren't, well, NIST didn't show them in their computer model, which allowed them to only have to have these beams push that girder halfway off of its seat. And then they say the flange folded once the web, which is the center of the I-beam, got only 6 inches off over the edge of the seat. Anyway, so none of that could have happened. But and if it did, we would have expected the building again to tip over because it's damaged in the northeast corner. When buildings that are damaged, they fall to the side of that damage. They are not falling straight down on themselves. And how fast was this fall? Feature number 4 shows us a feature of controlled demolition, which is free fall acceleration. Now, that's how fast this building came down, clocked by physicists like David Chandler, who document that it came down as fast as a bowling ball falling out of the sky. Well, the bowling ball has no resistance under it. This building had 40,000 tons of structural steel resistance. It couldn't possibly have crushed those columns while falling at free fall. That's an impossibility, which NIST finally acknowledged in their final report after denying it for 6 years. They finally acknowledge it, but they don't acknowledge the implications of that free fall, which are what? That all of these columns gave way on every floor for at least 8 or 9 floors, because that was the period of time that was documented in free fall, meaning that a third of this building's 7-second fall was in free fall, which means that 8 stories had to have gone somewhere else. The columns, 80 columns times 8 floors, had to have been removed instantaneously, floor by floor. Now, are these fires going to be doing that? No, these fires are not going to be doing that. And nor are they going to be responsible for feature number 5 of controlled demolition, the total dismemberment of the structural steel form. We had a 47-story moment-resisting steel frame skyscraper here, fallen like a house of cards. So all the columns and the beams, or most all of them, have been severed one from another to facilitate this. Moment resisting is where the columns and the beams are very rigidly welded one to another. You can't, it's not just going to fall like a house of cards. It might begin a collapse. If such a thing could happen, it would fall over to the path of least resistance, like these buildings, where the columns and beams are not severed one from another. The building's recognizable as a building. It doesn't fall like a house of cards. The concrete is not pulverized to a fine powder. Are these fires going to be able to accomplish that level of damage? Not going to happen. What can? Well, explosions can, and explosions would be evidenced by their audio and visual signatures, like as heard by witnesses which Sham Sunder denies specifically any of these witnesses, and none of them appear in the reports that are produced by NIST.
We were watching the building actually because it was on fire. The bottom floors of the building were on fire, and we heard this sound that sounded like a clap of thunder. Turned around, we were shocked to see that the building was it looked like there was a shock wave ripping through the building, and the windows all busted out, and it was horrifying. And then about a second later, the bottom floor caved out, and the building followed after that, and we saw the building crash down all the way to the ground.
Wow, a sound of a clap of thunder, a shock wave ripping through the building, the windows busting out, and then the building coming down. This is an important order of events. This is not the building collapsing causing these sounds and appearances. Let's listen to Kevin McPadden, former Air Force medic.
You heard explosions, like boom, It has like a distinct sound. It's not like when in compression, like boom, 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 like floors that were dropping and collapsing. This was boom, and like you felt a rumble in the ground, like almost like you wanted to grab onto something. That, to me, I knew that was an explosion. There was no doubt in my mind.
Okay, that's very helpful. How about Bill Rosati? What did he see?
I was standing like 2 blocks away, and all of a sudden I just seen a big flash, and then I seen the building coming down, and I just seen people just running everywhere, chaotic like.
A big flash and then the building coming down. Interesting. How about Kevin? How about Captain Richard Patterson of the New York Fire Department?
1-7 let go as well, and was a series of concussive explosions.
And he clarified that that was before the tower came down. And the other first responder we have here, Patrick Dillon, what did he see?
I remember feeling that like it was like freight trains underneath the earth, shaking the earth, even shaking me. That's when we all saw Building 7 crumple in the middle, like way up at the top. It buckled and then dropped.
So again, in a specific order of events, the ground is shaking and then he sees the building buckling. And Richard Rotan's deputy director of New York's Office of Emergency Management, he had to go back into the building and assess the damage at about noon, I think, or 12:30. What did he experience?
Then he had to go into that building to assess it.
You could hear the building creak above us. You could hear things fall. You could hear the fire burning. You could see columns just hanging from the upper floors, gaping holes in the floors up above us. There was an elevator car that was blown out of its shaft and it was down the hall.
Wait a minute. Gaping holes in floors? He's talking about the elevator shaft here and down the hall 30 to 40 feet, as he clarified later. What can blow an elevator cab out of its shaft landing down the hall 30 to 40 feet? Fires don't do that. Okay. And these explosions are corroborated by witnesses like Barry Jennings, who, along with Michael Hess, the Mayor Giuliani's attorney, was called to a meeting because a plane had hit the tower in the emergency management center on the 23rd floor. They got up to the 23rd floor, but realized everybody had been evacuated and they were told to get out of that building. And here's their experience on the way down.
When we got to the 8th floor, I started walking to one side of the building. That side of the building was gone. The first explosion I heard when I was on the stairwell landing, when we made it down to the 6th floor. Then we made it back to the 8th floor. I heard some more explosions.
What sort of sound?
Like a boom. Like an explosion.
More than one?
Yes. We started walking down the stairs. We made it to the 8th floor. Big explosion. Blew us back into the 8th floor. When we get outside, a police officer comes to me and says, you have to run. We have more information of bombs, so you have to run.
Bombs denied by NIST, bombs like this heard in the late morning of 9/11 in the vicinity of Building 7.
Yeah, here's one of the guys who can tell you I'm okay, all right? Here, hold on. You want to call your mother or something?
And looking in the direction of Building 7. Well, NIST denies every one of these witnesses, and they claim to have interviewed more than 100 first responders, and they missed these. And how about this expert? What do the experts say? This is Danny Jowenko, one of the top European controlled demolition experts.
Danny Jowenko is the expert on this in Europe. What did he say?
Dit is controlled demolition. Zeker weten. Zeker weten. Er is nagesprongen. Dit is in opdracht gebeurd. Dit heeft een team gedaan van experts.
A higher job done by a team of experts. Professional work without a doubt. How about other professionals like this structural engineer, Kamal Obaid? A localized failure in a steel frame building like World Trade Center 7 cannot cause a catastrophic collapse like a house of cards without a simultaneous and patterned loss of several of its columns at key locations within the building. Does that sound like something fire can do? Well, this caught the attention of one of the top forensic structural engineers in the country, Professor Leroy Hulsey from the University of Alaska, who assembled two different teams of his PhD candidates and had them competing with each other with SAP 2000, a high-tech software program for structural work, and Abacus. And they worked together and against each other to duplicate each other's results if possible. And they did. They both found that, gosh, if columns 79, 80, and 81 would have failed, it would have fallen to the northeast corner, just like we would have suspected. And not only that, they said, what do we have to do to get this building to fall the way it did in the actual video of the building's collapse? Well, they had to take out all the columns in the building, and that's what they did. On the left, you see their work compared to the video in the center, compared to NIST's computer animation on the right, which they won't even show us the rest of the collapse because it begins to tip over. It begins to crumple like a beer can. They've released 400 structural steel connections every second in order to get it to fail, and they still can't get it to fail or back engineer this computer model to show a collapse like the video. So what are the findings of the University of Alaska? Fire did not cause the collapse here. The temperatures were not high enough to cause the weakening of the steel framing. The thermal expansion did not result in a loss of support for the beams and the girders. The collapse of this building was a global failure involving what? The near simultaneous failure of all the columns in the building, not a progressive collapse as claimed by NIST. So these findings have been presented to every congressman on 2 occasions, and we have gotten literally no action at all. They've been presented to the engineering community as well. They just do not want to touch this subject. It is a dark subject, does not want to be handled, but it has to be handled by those courageous enough to handle it. And there, as I mentioned, 3,600 architects and engineers, including 3 to 4 or 5 dozen structural engineers, signed on to the petition. And so we have to ask ourselves, what could have brought this building down? Well, let's look at the clues available, for instance, from not conspiracy theorists, but in this case, FEMA, in their Building Performance Assessment Team report, May of 2002. They did a metallurgical examination of the steel from the building. What did they find? Never before observed eutectic reactions in intergranular melting capable of turning a solid steel girder into Swiss cheese, like we see in this piece of World Trade Center 7 steel. Silver dollar size holes. By the way, fires can't do this to steel, and neither can jet fuel. Jet fuel does not burn hot enough to melt steel, as we'll see. And yet this piece of steel from the Twin Towers is deeply corroded, a 5/8-inch steel flange and I-beam thinned to razor sharpness. What can cause this hot corrosion attack on the steel? Rapid oxidation, sulfidation, liquid iron, that's molten iron. That's 3,000 degrees temperature. What can cause that? Not fires, as you'll see. Sulfur formed during this hot corrosion attack on the steel. Where did the sulfur come from? NIST doesn't speculate. Actually, they do. It's called the deepest mystery uncovered in the investigation, according to the New York Times. NIST says, well, maybe the sulfur came from the gypsum board, which has calcium sulfate in it. Well, gypsum board has been used to protect steel from fire. It's never turned around and attacked the steel that it's designed to protect. So but the NIST throws all this information out from their final report when they took over the investigation in 2002. And they just, the presence of sulfur is just really not dealt with seriously at all. In fact, the fire protection engineer Jonathan Barnett says steel members in the debris pile that appear to have been partly evaporated in extraordinarily high temperatures. He's a fire protection engineer. He knows that these temperatures are not coming from fires. In fact, it takes 4,000 degrees to evaporate steel. Where are we going to get 4,000 degree temperatures? Which, by the way, temperatures up to 2,500 degrees are indicated by the color of the molten material pouring out of the crab claw excavator. We have 2,500 degrees easily because we can tell the emissivity, by the emissivity, by the color of the molten iron, what its temperature is likely to be. We're exceeding 2,500 degrees here. Well, the worst case office fires, mathematical experimental numbers are 1,830 degrees. We're still almost half of the documented temperatures. And most fires, especially these in World Trade Center 7, get nowhere near this hot, maybe 600 degrees. So what else can burn 600 degrees maximum? Jet fuel. Jet fuel burns only about that hot. Some say 1,800 degrees. Okay, let's give it to you. That is not hot enough to create molten steel flowing like lava from a volcano, which is what one of the firefighters say. Well, what can produce those temperatures? Well, can thermite? What is thermite anyway?
An incendiary used by the military, thermite is a compound of iron oxide and aluminum, which when ignited sustains an extreme heat reaction, creating molten iron. In just 2 seconds, thermite can reach temperatures over 4,500 degrees Fahrenheit, quite enough to liquefy steel. We know that open-air fires cannot burn hot enough to melt steel, but metal had melted at the base of the towers. Appendix C of the FEMA report describes sulfur residues on the World Trade Center steel. The New York Times called this the deepest mystery of all. Sulfur slightly lowers the melting point of iron, and iron oxide and iron sulfide had formed on the surface of the structural steel. Sulfur used with thermite is called thermate, producing even faster results.
Well, maybe we're getting somewhere here, Shayn, because if thermite were used, it would explain the incredible heat, 4,000 and even 5,000 degree temperatures we have documentation of, and from official sources. And it would explain the presence of sulfur, which is added to thermite to become thermate. Would also explain the other elements in the World Trade Center dust that can't be explained any other way. Evidence of ignited incendiaries. Is there any? Yeah. The U.S. Geological Survey, in their studies of the World Trade Center dust called the Particle Atlas of the World Trade Center Dust, released in 2005, they document what? Billions of previously molten, meaning over 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, iron, the byproduct of thermite, molten iron, microspheres. How do they get spherical? Well, I'll show you in a minute. These are about naked to the human eye, but I mean, you can see them. No, they're visible with the human eye. You can see them. The smallest ones are about a diameter of a human hair. But they're used as a signature component, says the EPA, to distinguish World Trade Center dust from common office building dust. In other words, it's not even World Trade Center dust unless it has all of these previously molten iron microspheres, which we don't know where they came from. They acknowledge also. They comprise up to 6% of some of these dust samples. Some speculate that there's up to 4 tons of this material throughout all the World Trade Center dust. So RJ Lee Group does corroborating observations and documentation in their analysis of the dust. They say they're formed during the event, not before, by the welders putting the building together, not afterward by the iron workers taking the building apart, but during the event itself. They're found as far away as a mile or two, even on the on-ramp to the Brooklyn Bridge. Well, how do we get molten iron microspheres? Well, we could do an experiment. Experiment is the arbiter of competing hypotheses. Let's do one. Let's burn some thermite and see what happens. In this controlled experiment, we have what look like thousands of sparks, but they cool, they fall into the pan as previously molten iron microspheres. Fascinating. How do they get spherical? Well, aerosolized liquids form themselves into spheres by the surface tension. So interesting. Throughout all the World Trade Center dust, is there any evidence, though, of unignited thermite? Because all of that was evidence of ignited thermite. Well, yeah, a team of 8 international scientists led by Niels Harrit and Stephen Jones did studies on these dust samples that they were sent and independently collected, 7 different samples. And we have they find these curious red-gray chips, and they are about the size of a human hair. They thought they were paint. Excuse me. They're 1/16 of an inch long. The largest of them, they're quite blown up. But unlike paint, they are attracted strongly to a magnet. They're highly ferromagnetic. So they get real curious. Let's look at this red layer and see if this is really paint. Well, what do they find? Aluminum and iron, Fe, iron, and manganese, the ingredients of thermate. This is very interesting. What is the ingredients of thermite and thermate doing in these dust samples? They get real curious. This should not be in all the paint samples that we have here. They get out their electron microscope from the lab at Brigham Young University and analyze the red layer, and they find iron oxide crystals and aluminum platelets 1,000 times smaller than the diameter of a human hair. What are they doing there? This is nanotechnology. And they review the literature, peer-reviewed literature, and they find explosive composites based on thermite reactions whose fuel and oxidizer constituents are intimately mixed on the nanometer scale. It's called super thermite. Somebody made this stuff. This is very sophisticated material before 2001. And you see, when you get these particles so small at the nanoscale, the surface volume increases exponentially, and you have an instantaneous chemical reaction. So you've engineered something which is an incendiary, which works by means of heat, to become more explosive, because these materials are set in a bed of oxygen, silica, and carbon. That's organic material, which expands rapidly in TNT and knocks things over. That's how explosives work. Versus incendiaries, which burn things up at 4,000 and 5,000 degree temperatures. Well, in the heater, Lawrence Livermore Lab ignited. This is a differential scanning calorimeter, which measures the resultant energy release. They have huge spikes of energy at about 400 degrees Celsius, 850 Fahrenheit. That's exactly what the samples from the team led by Niels Harrit and Stephen Jones found. Not only that, when they ignite, they produce something very interesting. Molten iron microspheres with the same chemical signature as the molten iron microspheres found and produced in all the World Trade Center dust by found and documented by the R.J. Lee and the U.S. Geological Survey. So we know exactly where these molten iron microspheres came from. They came from these red-gray chips, at least the ones that were ignited. How do we know that? The ones that are partially ignited are the previously molten iron microspheres are found attached to them, as you see here and here. This is not made in a cave in Afghanistan. This is made only in the most advanced defense contracting laboratories. So we have a target, if you will, in any real investigation that wants to get going at this level. And they can interview Lawrence Livermore Lab. They can do studies on the paint chips. They're not real paint. In fact, they've concluded in this peer-reviewed study, 25 pages long, the red layer of the red-gray chips that we've discovered in the World Trade Center dust is active, unreacted thermitic material incorporating nanotechnology. It's a highly energetic pyrotechnic or explosive material. Now, this has been out since 2009, and we've also given it to every member of Congress in two different coordinated campaigns, trying to get action from somebody. Jim Hines from Connecticut is one example who actually wrote NIST and said, hey, well, this looks very interesting. What are you going to say about this? Well, NIST wrote him back and said, we believe that it came from the red-gray chips because from the materials in the World Trade Center falling down and intermixing with each other. For instance, there's aluminum cladding in the World Trade Center Twin Towers. There's rust, which is iron oxide, the other ingredient of thermite. So that is their best effort at explaining what is clearly not that. You don't get a perfect mixture of aluminum to iron at the nanoscale from materials falling from the building. No. So we have key evidence, 10 key characteristic features and some very uncharacteristic features of controlled demolition in Building 7. And we have not one of them can be accounted for by fire, let alone all of them. With additional circumstantial evidence and corroborative testimony, this becomes proof of controlled demolition, a body of proof that's convinced more than 3,600 architects and engineers to demand a new investigation. And many of them appear in our ongoing film series. We have 4 episodes released. Next week, we'll have 5. And you can watch these. But let me give you a little hint of what it's about, because Mick Harrison, a public interest attorney, working with me in the boardroom of our virtual grand jurors, presented this evidence along with our experts, and it has been filmed and will be provided to the actual grand jury as we plan. And there's a lot of evidence here, and it is very, very convincing, as you've already begun to see. Let's take a quick look at the trailer.
No matter how improbable the conclusion may appear, when you've eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
We're bringing alive in the film the 60 exhibits of the 9/11 WTC evidence contained in the Lawyers Committee grand jury petition that have already been submitted to the U.S. Attorney in Manhattan to present to a special criminal jury.
This historic investigation is ongoing. There's a role for you in it. Yes, you can help us bring the real perpetrators to justice.
Through this film series, we're bringing together 24 experts in their field.
They ignored any scenario involving incendiaries.
Demolition work, you're going to set charges on each floor.
The building could not have been brought down by office fires.
In other words, all of the interior columns over 8 stories came down, were basically lost at once.
I could make out what looked like from a science fiction movie, molten lava, okay?
And he paused and said, that'll be coming down around 5 o'clock.
We'll be filming these evidence presentations, not only for our filing with the grand jury, also presentations to each of you.
We're inviting you to serve as virtual grand juror during each episode. And yes, you can watch these episodes at 911c2c.org. That's 911 letter C, number 2, letter C.org. And I encourage you to provide us your feedback on those, and let us know what you think of the Twin Towers, which will also be in the upcoming episodes. Because we have to ask ourselves a very serious question. If Building 7 came down by controlled demolition, and the evidence shows that it did, is it possible that the Twin Towers also might have suffered a similar fate? Well, let's just look at them both simultaneously collapsing here, though they were 15 minutes apart in real time. What do we see? Upward, outward, arching streamers, a geometry of fireworks, freely flying structural steel sections weighing 4 and 8 tons, laterally ejected at 80 miles an hour, clocked by physicists, landing up to 600 feet in every direction, trailed by thick white smoke clouds. Why are steel beams, which are not flammable in office fire conditions, trailed by thick white smoke clouds? Well, let's look at thermite burning once again. What do we see? molten iron. That's one. And thick white smoke clouds of aluminum oxide ash, the byproduct of thermite. Let's begin taking a look at the characteristic features of controlled demolition. See if they relate to buildings 1 and 2. Is there a sudden onset of destruction, the first feature of controlled demolition? Well, the North Tower is standing still, and all of a sudden it's in uniform downward motion. No jolt, no hesitation upon impact of the cold, hard steel below. Just smooth acceleration, as we'll see in a moment. Same at the South Tower. No stoppage, no resistance, or very little visual resistance from the cold, hard steel below. We're told that the upper part drove the rest of the building down to the ground and then destroyed itself. This is called the crush down, crush up theory. It suffers, though, from Newton's third law of motion. There's an equal and opposite destructive force when two bodies collide. We'll get to that. But Zdeněk Bazan of Northwestern University in Chicago, who's a mathematical wizard, created the most confounding paper that took engineers 10 years to decode. When they did, and when did he submit this paper? 2 days, just 2 days after 9/11. The rest of us are freaked out. We're trying to figure out who attacked our country. When's the next plane coming? Not this guy. He had it all prepared and submitted 2 days after 9/11. We'll show you what happened when engineers decoded that. But again, it suffers from the fact that there's an equal and opposite reaction, destructive force, when two bodies collide. Take a Mack truck and drive it into a Volkswagen. Who wins? The Mack truck, right? So maybe the bumper will get destroyed by the Volkswagen. Does it matter if we drop the Volkswagen on top of the Mack truck? No. The upper part, the lightest part of the structure, with the steel beams, columns that are only 5/8 inch thick, can't possibly destroy the cold, hard, thicker steel. Look at what happens. It's a virtual pyramid. At half height, we're 22 inches by 52 inches. And then that steel begins to fill in heavier and heavier and heavier until at the bottom it's 22 inches by 52 inches by solid steel. Well, let's see if the Volkswagen's being destroyed, or is it destroying the structure below? Take a look here. Watch the red line, the line of the plane impacts. Is the upper part destroying the lower part, or is the upper part being destroyed by something? It's telescoping in on itself. It's being destroyed itself in the first few seconds here. If it were destroying the lower part, we would see it. But none of the photos, none of the videos show an upper part after the 3 seconds at all. It's been destroyed. If it were there, it would have destroyed these few remaining columns standing 800 feet in the air for a dozen seconds. And then they have an explosion or something beneath them that causes them to fall vertically through the smoke that's emitting from them. So, what are we really dealing with here? Look at the left and the right and compare them. Which is buildings, the World Trade Center tower, which is a volcanic eruption in the Tongan Sea. Yeah, the volcanic eruption's on the right, but you can hardly tell the difference. Right? Upward, outward, arching streamers, a geometry of fireworks, freely flying, solid, molten objects trailed by thick, white smoke clouds. Yeah, you begin to see the analogy that works here. This is not a building collapsing. This is not what Zdenek Bazant told us, a crush down, crush up. That is a lie. What's really going on here? Outward expulsion, ejection of structural steel components and everything else, leaving intact for a dozen seconds the core columns. They weren't crushed by this upper section whatsoever. So we go to feature number 2 and see if there were patterned explosions, flashes of light heard and seen by witnesses. Well, yeah, 156 of them withheld from the American people by the city of New York until the New York Court State of Appeals forced them to release these 12,000 pages of documentation from hundreds of witnesses, all read by Professor Graham McQueen, who found something very interesting in all of these testimonies. We felt the ground shake. You could see the tower sway. And then it just came down. Again and again, you're going to hear the specific order of events. They're hearing something. They're seeing something. They're feeling something before, many of them, the tower collapses. All of a sudden, the ground just started shaking. Felt like a train running under my feet. The next thing we know, we look up and the tower is collapsing. Shook my bones. Shortly before the first tower came down, I remember feeling the ground shaking, heard a terrible noise, and then debris just started flying everywhere. I saw flash, flash, flash at the lower level of the building. You know, like when they demolish a building? Saw a number of brief light sources being emitted from inside the building between floors 10 and 15. He saw about 6 of these brief flashes accompanied by a crackling sound before the tower collapsed. I saw low-level flashes. I saw flash, 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 and then it looked like the building came down. An explosion appeared at the very top, simultaneously from all 4 sides. Material shot out horizontally, and then there seemed to be a momentary delay before you could see the beginning of the collapse. How specific does this fire chief, this expert witness, need to be? By the way, NIST did not acknowledge any of these 156 first responders who were witnesses of explosions. They claim to have interviewed more than 100 first responders. And they missed all of these. There was an explosion in the South Tower. I kept watching, one floor under another. When it hit about the 5th floor, I figured it was a bomb because it looked like a synchronized, deliberate kind of thing. Okay, let's see if feature number 3 gives us any corroboration. Is there a straight down symmetrical progression? Well, in the South Tower, it actually begins to fall over. So we have asymmetrical loading from this part that's falling over at 22 degrees. We have asymmetrical damage from the planes, asymmetrical damage from the fires. How in the world, then, do we get complete symmetrical damage, just like the firefighters described, all the way around, like a belt, all these explosions, all the way down to the ground? The symmetry is astounding. We can get a clue as to what's going on here by zooming in on, with this camera, where we see what? In this looped video, I'm counting about a dozen independent explosions, floor by floor. This is not a building collapsing. These can only be pre-placed explosive charges in the exterior perimeter structural steel system. Fascinating. Let's go to feature number 4 and see if there are any isolated explosive ejections. Well, this is what we have these are called squibs in the controlled demolition industry. They occur as far down as 20 stories. In fact, even 40 stories down, we have these isolated explosive ejections. And there's no explanation for these whatsoever, even though they're occurring, especially because they're occurring 60 stories down below the zone of destruction. They're expelling solids out of the sides of these buildings. And yet, we're told this is a gravitational collapse due to damage from the planes way up above and the fires. Here on the left side of the South Tower, as it begins to lean right, we see about a dozen independent, isolated squibs or explosions going off almost all at once, severing the steel structure from itself so that it can't act anymore as a rigid body and maintain its angular momentum and pivot off the rigid body below it. So it just settles back down into a vertical fall. It's been turned into sand, essentially, like sand. We have feature number 5. Is there free fall acceleration? Well, darn near 64% of free fall. It's accelerating this building down this fast at 2/3 of free fall. It's not slowing down when it meets the cold, hard steel below. With 47 massive core columns in the core here and 240 perimeter columns, more steel than glass on the exterior of this building. And yet it's not even slowing down when it meets that cold, hard, intact steel? No. Let's talk about those perimeter steel sections, 14-inch square steel tube columns. 3 of them, 37 feet tall, tied together at each floor with these spandrel panels of steel. What happens to them? Well, feature number 7 shows us that they are laterally ejected, a very uncommon feature, by the way, of controlled demolition, impaling themselves in skyscrapers all around the towers, destroying the Winter Garden 600 feet away, destroying the Deutsche Bank building. It had to be taken down piece by piece. These sections are bolted one to the other at the top and bottom of these 14-inch square columns with, in this case, 4 5/8-inch bolts. And all the plane had to do with 10,000 gallons of fuel and a massive load of kinetic energy because of the 500 mile per hour speed is punch these in, which sheared off those bolts. And so, yes, there's plenty of evidence of planes, and I have a whole presentation on that on my website at richardgage911.org. And you see these structural steel sections are ejected laterally. Let's watch a few of them. Ejected laterally at up to 80 miles an hour. They weigh 4 and 8 tons. Watch this one. It's about to hit building 7. Wait a minute. Back, 2, forward, 2, back, 2. What's it trailing? Thick white smoke clouds. Is steel flammable at office fire conditions or with jet fuel? No. Again, those burn typically a quarter of the temperature capable of melting steel.
I mean, if you're trying to look at another instance too, In 1945, there was a U.S. bomber that ended up hitting the Empire State Building.
Yeah.
Only 13 died, not nearly as much damage. It looks like, at least from the pictures, that the initial fire looks like it was significantly worse. So, and that building didn't collapse in nearly the same way. So, I mean, even if you're just looking in New York, there's other cases
It didn't
of
collapse
buildings
at
being
all.
hit.
Yeah.
It didn't collapse at all.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, planes don't do that to skyscrapers, and not even 707s, which is what John Skilling designed these buildings for originally. He said the problem would be that the fuel would dump into the building, but the building would still be there. And indeed, even with 757s, the building was still there. But there's enough energy here to hurl a 200-pound cannonball 3 miles. That's a lot of energy, and there's thousands of these cannonballs. Well, many hundreds. And so we're talking about an ejection well outside the perimeter of the World Trade Center, destroying the Winter Gardens here on the left, 600 feet away. And by the way, Shayn, if 100,000 tons of steel framing is distributed outside the building's footprint, then we got to ask ourselves a key question. What's left to crush the building? The steel is a third of the weight of this building. 300,000 tons building each. So what's crushing the building? It's not the steel. It can't crush the building if it's up to 600 feet away from the perimeter. It's not available. Maybe it was a concrete. Let's look at the concrete. Feature number 8. Is the concrete pulverized? We're missing 110 floors of concrete, each of them at 4 and 8 inches thick. Concrete poured on this metal decking, supported by lightweight steel trusses. We're looking for 110 of these assemblies. We don't find 50. We don't find 10. We don't find 1 acre size. Each floor was an acre in size. We don't find a half acre, quarter acre, 16th of an acre size floor. In a real pancaking collapse, like this one in Mexico, we find pancakes. So how about in Bangkok, Thailand, where a real pancaking collapse as a result of an earthquake, where the building just crunched down because it was under construction. So it didn't behave as well as it would have had it been finished. But look at the size of this pile. You can tell that we're exceeding 7 stories here. Look at the people on the right. This is a 33-story building, a third of the height of the Twin Towers, yet 3 times the height of the pile. Where is it coming from? I mean, where did the Twin Towers go? So, we're looking for all that concrete. There it is. It's pulverized in midair. 90,000 tons of concrete. How did it get pulverized? Well, high energy explosives can pulverize concrete. Turns out that heat can as well. At 1500 degrees, concrete is powderized. We know this by looking at the report C856 from the American Society of Testing and Materials. White powder decomposed hydration products at 1500 degrees Fahrenheit. Fascinating. How hot can thermite get? 4,000 and 5,000 degrees. Fully capable of powderizing concrete back to its hydration, decomposed hydration products, meaning gravel, sand, cement powder. So this is corroborated also by the Fire Safety Journal, which says at 2,200 degrees Fahrenheit, half the temperatures that we had, concrete decomposes. Wow. Well, That is just fascinating. By the way, if concrete is pulverized in midair and delivered laterally throughout lower Manhattan, 90,000 tons of it, in average 100 micron particles, meaning powder mostly, 30% of this powder is concrete, by the way, according to the U.S. Geological Survey. What's crushing the building? It's delivered in a blanket 3 inches thick across all of lower Manhattan. What's crushing the building? It wasn't the steel. That was a third of the weight of the buildings. And it's not the concrete. That's another third of the weight of this building. That's 2/3 of the building that was not available to crush the building below. And yet, that's exactly what Zdeněk Bizant used, all of that weight in his fraudulent theory. Not only did he use all of that weight that wasn't available, he doubled the mass up above in his mathematical calculation that took engineers 10 years to decode, those engineers being Tony Zambodi, Richard Johns, Gregory Zudolinski. And by the way, they reduced the column strength below by more than 3 times. The thing was, this mathematical equation was completely rigged in favor of a collapse. And they produced their own paper, a couple of them. One of them submitted to the very same paper, a journal, that Zdeněk Bizant published his crush down, crush up theory in Journal of Engineering Mechanics, but they wouldn't publish it. What did the American Society of Testing and American Society of Civil Engineers say? The reason they wouldn't publish it? It was out of scope. Wait a minute. How is it out of scope to provide a paper that challenges a previously published paper in that journal? That's what you do in peer-reviewed science. That's the whole purpose. So there are lawsuits and ethics violations that have been filed, and they're ongoing. How would they have gotten access to plant explosives or incendiaries or both in these buildings? Well, they might have during the fireproofing upgrades, which happened in the months and years prior to 9/11. Coincidentally, some of those floors were the exact same floors that were hit by the planes. Coincidence? Probably not. Could liquid applied nanothermite been used instead of fireproofing? There is liquid fireproofing. It's called intumescent paint. Maybe that was applied to the underside of the slabs, providing the 4,000 degree heat that could pulverize the concrete. We don't know. Maybe they had access also to the core columns and beams in the building through the elevator shafts, because those elevator shafts are directly next to core columns and beams in the building. Ace Elevator had this contract. We'll talk about them, but they would have had to have gotten through 2 inches of gypsum board at every level, all the way up, or most all the way up for these towers. So, but that would create a lot of dust. If you've ever worked with gypsum board, you'd be surprised how much dust that creates. And could it have gotten into the ventilation shafts? Listen to Scott Forbes, the senior database administrator for Fiduciary Trust, one of the tenants at the World Trade Center.
It was probably the week leading up to 9/11. Every morning I'd come in around 7 a.m. and the dust was incredible. It was filthy. It was like the cleaners weren't cleaning. Right where the windows were, there was a sill which enclosed radiators. I was sick to death of the dust which was appearing on the windowsills. It was dirty grey and very, very noticeable in that week leading up to 9/11.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. In fact, there was the largest elevator modernization in the world, March 2001, documented by Elevator World, and Ace Elevator was featured as the contractor who came out of nowhere, by the way, to get this contract from Otis Elevator, who had installed and had been maintaining these elevators up to the time of 9/11. Excuse me, up to the time of this contract. Very interesting. So we want to find out what happened to these elevator mechanics who were in this building. Well, they were called out to a labor dispute that day in that time frame, and the members of that company, about 50 of them, were pulled out to a union meeting to discuss business. So they weren't at risk whatsoever. Was that an undercover operation to plant explosives or incendiaries in the building? Maybe. It needs more research, obviously. And so we have easily the largest and most perplexing structural failures in history. But what happened to all this steel? It was sent to China for recycling, 400 truckloads a day, before investigators could get their hands on it and do a proper forensic examination of the steel. It was gone. This is the illegal destruction of evidence in a crime scene, prompting Bill Manning, editor-in-chief of Fire Engineering magazine, to cry out, "Crucial evidence that could answer many questions is on the slow boat to China, showing an astounding ignorance of government officials to the value of a thorough scientific investigation. The destruction and removal of evidence must stop immediately." But it didn't. And that's why we have 10 key characteristic features and some very uncharacteristic features, especially including the incendiaries and explosives, all of which is direct evidence of destruction with explosives, none of which is explained by fire, and which becomes proof of controlled demolition. A body of proof that's, again, convinced 3,600 architects and engineers to demand a new investigation, who do appear in the already issued and forthcoming episodes of 9/11 Crime Scene to Courtroom. And if you want to see our classic presentation on this subject, documentary, it's called 9/11 Explosive Evidence, Experts Speak Out, with actor Ed Asner. We also have World Trade Center Building 7, a 15-minute, very professional documentary done that you can see, get these DVDs on our website, or you can watch them for free on our website. And 7, the movie about the University of Alaska's forensic structural analysis of Building 7 with Leroy Hulsey. All of these facts are documented outlined in this brochure, which you can download for free and print and hand to every architect and engineer you can find, everybody else that you know, your media representatives, elected representatives, friends, colleagues, family, because we got to get to the truth about 9/11. It's a dark one, and it is not what we were told. We've been lied to. We've been scammed on a colossal scale. This is a false flag operation, which are operations that governments used to manipulate their people to support a war by blaming another country for an attack on our, in this case, cultural icons and economic icons and defensive buildings, the Pentagon particularly. So where do you draw your line in the sand? Do you wait for the next 9/11? Well, we've had a couple of them, by the way. If you've had your head in the sand, you may have missed COVID over the last 5 years. You may have missed Gaza in 2023, a classic let it happen on purpose, false flag operation. No, it's time to speak the truth about 9/11. That's what Shayn is doing. That's what I'm doing. That's what thousands and thousands of others are doing. We're asking each of you to join us. At least share this information with everybody you know. It's not too late to get to the bottom of 9/11. So join us in doing that. Right, Shayn?
Absolutely. And I thank you for compiling all of this research that you've been able to do, because I don't think anybody else has this much information all put together in the manner in which you have it put together. And with this, man, it's all going to be a house of cards. I think that once this actually starts getting investigated seriously, then people are going to start actually taking that magnifying glass to a lot of these other events that we've looked at. And inevitably, I think it's going to be like a house of cards. Once one piece starts to fall, everything else is going to start to chip away. And maybe we'll actually start getting to the reasons as to why the U.S. government went on to do this to its own people. Other than, of course, the most obvious ones would be to push people into war. But this is such an in-depth operation that I feel like there just has to be more to it. It can't just be just as simple as they wanted to try to push people into war. Like there's a lot more to all of this stuff.
Yeah, it's a deep psychological operation to control people and to manipulate us into a state of fear, to support our troops in Afghanistan and Iraq, of all places. And yeah, we've got to wake up. It's not too late. We're going to be in a police state if we don't raise the alarm, all of us, and wake the sleeping sheeple up.
I mean, after COVID, it's one of those really, really hard points where if you didn't wake up after that, I'm not sure if you're going to ever eventually wake up. But, maybe it'll be kind of like this, where once more information starts coming out a couple of years later, people will actually start coming around to the concept that, yes, your government has been lying to you. I mean, especially with the COVID stuff, it seems like it's not till 5-10 years later that we're really going to start seeing stuff. I mean, even 5 years later, we're starting to see a little bit more with the reports. And it appears the same way with a lot of this 9/11 stuff, that a lot of these serious reports really diving into this didn't start coming out until 2008, 2009. So, it's not until years later that we really start getting to dive into this stuff. But unfortunately, like you kind of mentioned towards the end, when we really get the opportunity to dive into this stuff years later, the evidence has already been destroyed, and we're essentially just dealing with whatever information we still have documented on paper, but we don't have that physical evidence to go back to. But, if we're aware of these events, then if things like this happen in the future, then we can take that step to do these initial investigations right off the bat before the opportunity gets passed where they can move all this type of information out and essentially destroy the crime scene.
Yeah, right on. That's what they do. Each time they destroy the crime scene. And after manipulating us, after wringing us of our funds and stealing billions of dollars in all kind of different ways through each of these false flag events, I shudder to think of where we're heading.
Especially traumatizing each generation, because I was in elementary school when the initial attacks happened. And even in elementary school, I remember them showing it on TV. So you had generations of kids watching these towers fall. And particularly, they were showing that that shot where the person jumps out of the towers. So, I mean, you're obviously trying to do this trauma-induced propaganda. And it seems like each generation, there's going to be one major thing that pops up. So you have to have that pattern recognition going ahead of time and hopefully be able to spot it before you're psychologically manipulated by, some of the traumatic events that they're trying to show on TV to even small children.
Yeah. We turn into an infantile-like psychological state of mind, even as adults, when we are confronted with the unknown and in a terrorizing way. We're literally under attack, right? Especially New Yorkers. And so we're prone to accept the first answers that come from our government. Within 48 hours, they have the hijackers' names and pictures all lined up. Osama bin Laden. It turns out none of that is true. They're all patsies. So the subject of other research that I haven't done, but many others have. So yeah, the pilots on those planes couldn't even have flown a Cessna. They didn't fly well. They were not allowed to rent a Cessna because their flight instructors didn't trust them, and yet they get into a 757. All of a sudden, they can control it. No, most 9/11 researchers believe that these planes were flown remotely by remote operation, automated flight control systems.
Just out of curiosity, before we start wrapping stuff up, how far back do you think this could potentially go as far as having the intention that this building was going to get destroyed one day? Coming from the Detroit area, we actually have the predecessor build, or the original attempt at this building that's right near our Hart Plaza downtown, and it's basically like a half size, I guess you could say, World Trade Center. So I'm assuming that it is probably a somewhat reasonable thing that they'll attempt to do a smaller version of these bigger buildings before they actually try to do the bigger structure, just to make sure that they're going to be structurally sound and work. But on the other side of it, it kind of raises questions as far as, did they potentially do this type of stuff because they had the intention that this was going to get destroyed one day, and maybe they kind of had it set up where, you know, if something happened beforehand, it was going to stay structurally sound, but when the time came, they already kind of had it set up where these are the spots where this building would be able to be destroyed from.
Yeah, well, that's possible. They obviously did a very professional job in both cases. Building 7, a classic implosion, obviously setting charges at most of the floors and allowing its symmetrical free fall. There doesn't get to be a better job than that, although I believe it was supposed to come down earlier that day and it was a dud, and they fixed that apparently because they were expecting it to come down all day after that. I also appreciate the dark work of whoever was assigned to the demolition task of the Twin Towers, planting explosives at every third floor, perhaps, throughout the building, and destroying it top down, so that the top didn't fall off, so that the building didn't fall over, rather than if it were a bottom up explosion, they would have, which is typical in controlled demolitions, they would have run the risk of the building tipping over. So did I answer your question, Shayn? I'm not sure.
Yeah. I was going to say, just how far back, I guess, would be the good question. Do you think that they had the intention, so when they first started building this building, that it was eventually going to come down one day? Or do you think that it was more so like specifically targeted and picked later on when they actually started to kind of kick these events into action?
I don't know what their intentions were. Some cite legends or myths that Twin Towers are part of the Illuminati and that they need to be taken down somehow for their ritual. Who knows? But we do know that we're not talking about explosives that lasted 50 years from the time the buildings were built, 73. They were topped out until they were taken down. Is that 50 or 25 years?
See, the reason I'm asking is because it seems like this was something that was kind of planted in the psyche of people throughout the years. I know a lot of people like to view it as maybe people were predicting the events of 9/11 because there's all of these little clues hidden throughout social media, or not throughout social media, but through media. But I'm on the other reverse side of that I think that if you are always showing these images of New York, and every single time you show these images of New York, you're purposely showing the Twin Towers, then anybody that thinks of New York, that's going to be the first thing that you think of. So it's not so much that people were predicting it, but if they already had the intention that these towers were going to be destroyed one day, they wanted to put that into the psyche of people that this is what you associate with New York, because with that as an extension, anybody that would come from another country and, quote, attack the city, that would also be the first thing on their mind. So I kind of feel like it goes farther back. But again, it's not necessarily people predicting these events, but rather that this was something that was set in motion a very long time ago. And it was just a matter of setting up the house of cards and waiting for that perfect moment to flick out the bottom from it.
Well, there are 70 different examples of the Twin Towers being attacked in Hollywood and related entertainment venues. So it is certainly predictive programming in addition to what you might be describing.
So I guess kind of starting to wrap up towards the end, I always like to wrap up the show with some words of wisdom. So if there was any words of wisdom you might want to bestow on the listeners today, what might it be?
Well, I'm thinking, what do you do now as somebody who's heard this information for the first or the second or the 10th time? What do you do now? You've got solid scientific forensic evidence that we've presented that I hope that your conscience won't allow you to sit on and worse, forget about. Shayn and I are hoping that you guys will take action and share Shayn's podcast. He took a risk, his own reputation, to bring this controversial evidence, this conspiracy theory, to your attention. But we don't bring conspiracies or theories. We brought scientific forensic evidence. You can construct your own theories and you can construct your own conspiracies around it, but don't sit on it. What are you going to do when your child or grandchild looks you in the eye when we're sitting or living in a full-on tyranny, and they ask you, what did you do? And you can't even say, well, I sent out a podcast. You can't even say that. Don't be one of those people. Do what you can to save your country, because we are losing it. If we lose our country, we lose the world.
Agreed. This is one of those things that was such a defining moment for people that are in my generation. Like I said, millennials / Gen X. So I feel like it's one of those things that woke a lot of people up, and it started making people think in this abstract way to actually see, between the lines. So I feel like this is one of those things that definitely needs to be laid to rest and finally have some closure on it, because it sparked a whole generation of free thinkers.
Yeah, it really did. So everybody do your part.
And again, if anybody wanted to possibly do their part, check out these documentaries and even be able to chime in for the court case. Where, again, can everybody go for the audio listeners?
Yeah, that's Richard Gage, 911.org. Lots of information, lots of items to share in our store that you can learn more from and share with everybody you know.
Well, I thank you for taking the time to come onto the show to lay out all of this information for the listeners. And again, I thank you for putting their time into doing this research, compiling all the information that you have. And I'm really looking forward to seeing where this goes with you in the future, and seeing what kind of groundbreaking work you're able to do as far as actually opening up this, quote, conspiracy for people.
Right on. Thank you so much, Shayn, for having us.